Man, I really want to make sure that this review is protected from scrutiny, but how can I do that? Maybe if I come up with 3 words that I'm not going to say once during the video out loud, maybe that will protect the video. Okay, well, let's try it. So let's see, I just need to come up with 3 words that are not going to be used by me. I want to use garrulous, but I want to use garrulous. So let's not use that one. How about cacophony? Because cacophony describes a sound, and this is a book, this by definition, and I didn't listen to the audiobook, I read the book, there's no sounds in this book. So yeah, cacophony sounds good. Let's use cacophony. And then the second word, that's a word that I'll never use. How about phalanges? That's a word, that's like an obscure word. I'm never gonna use phalanges. So that one works. What about third word? Maybe something that doesn't really even exist. How about poopsicle? I don't think poopsicle is even a word. Would I even say that? Why would I say that? Yeah, let's do that. Okay, so the 3 words will be cacophony, phalanges, and poopsicle. Okay, now I just need to put these words into something digestible and consume it. Perfect. This review will never have any scrutiny upon it whatsoever. Let the impenetrable review begin. BookSquirrel. I don't know. Hey everyone, welcome to BookSquirrel, and this is my review for We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. This will be the 6th book that I review from my 20 top ranked horror book TBR tier list video, and my feelings have kind of been all over the place with this, so I'm excited to chat a bit about it. Unlike my last book, I did finish this one, so I will be going back to my ACORN system, which looks at the book's approach, characters, offerings, readability, and narration. Each category has a potential of 20 acorns or points for a total potential of 100 acorns. But before I get to the categories, I would like to go over some of the details of the book. We Have Always Lived in the Castle is about 152 pages. It was originally published in September of 1962. The copy that I have was published in October of 2006. Now, I will say I like this copy. However, there are some things about it that kind of bug me. The main thing is these particularly rough edges. Obviously, this is very intentional. But why? Do people like this? I don't like this. I like to be able to page through with my thumb, and instead it's just big clumps and chunks of pages. Minor gripe, but it still bugged me. And as I was reading it, sometimes you get to a point where the page is really far in and it looks like it was just bound poorly. But I know this was done intentionally. I don't know. Maybe it's to say, ooh, this is an old book. I don't know. But anyways, let's get to the blurb. Now, this book really doesn't have much of a blurb. There is a semblance of a blurb on the inside of the cover here, so that's what I'm going to read. But spoiler alert, this is literally just the first paragraph of the book, so take that for what it is. Okay, here is the pseudo blurb. My name is Mary Catherine Blackwood. I am 18 years old, and I live with my sister Constance. I have often thought that with any luck at all, I could have been born a werewolf, because the 2 middle fingers on both my hands are the same length. But I have had to be content with what I had. I dislike washing myself, and dogs, and noise. I like my sister Constance, and Richard Plantagenet, and Amanita phalloides, the death cup mushroom. Everyone else in my family is dead. Rereading this now, I'm like, who the hell is Richard Plantagenet? That's the 3rd Duke of York. When I first read that blurb, I literally thought to myself, that must be a character in the book that we'll get to. And rereading now, I'm like, whoo. Okay, well, I knew nothing about Richard Plantagenet. I don't even know if that's how you... Okay, let's get to those acorns. Approach. What if I don't want to approach? What if I want to see them approach while I hide safely behind a bush or a tree? I think I'd prefer that. And then I can watch them talk about me as they will. Say mean things about me, and I can know everything that they really think about me, even when they don't say it out loud in front of my face. I don't think A should stand for approach. I think it should stand for Amanitas Phalloides. Amanitas Phalloides acorns, am I right? Knowing that the blurb is really just the first paragraph of the book makes more sense to me. I was a little confused reading it. I was like, okay, well, I think it does set the book up really well. It says, hey, this is who I am. I'm the narrator. These are things about me. Even though she's 18 years old, she definitely reads as much younger, but at the same time, she really reads very neurodivergent. And I'll speak more about that in a little bit. But a lot of the book really does surround the inner thoughts of Mary Catherine, also known as Mary Cat, which I think is cute. And even though I was a little confused about what are the promises here, what am I actually going to read, I was still intrigued. I think the first paragraph does have a little bit of a hook here saying, most of my family's dead, I just live with my sister, which is also not true because she also lives with her uncle. So very soon I was like, didn't you say the rest of your family's dead? She must mean like immediate family because she does still have some extended family. So the blurb was a little confusing to me, but the cover, I love this cover. I think this cover is really cool. It gives me the vibes of Tim Burton's early works. This cover doesn't predate Tim Burton, but the book does, right? So I don't know. I think that the artist really saw the similarities too, and I think this is a hit. Wraps around, and we get some angry people. And I didn't know a whole lot about Shirley Jackson's work herself, although I will say she's the writer of The Lottery, the short story The Lottery, which I did read. I don't remember it exactly. I would like to revisit that at some point, but I mean, I remember the gist. And so realizing that, I went, oh, okay, so this is the same author for that. Who's to say what she's going to throw at me now? The first 10%, I really found myself having to adjust to the psychology of the narrator. She has a repetitious cycling of some disorganized thinking, which I relate to as someone who can ruminate on things. I thought it was very humanistic for her to kind of be triggered into the same thinking every now and then. And I found her perspective to actually be a little relatable and also intriguing. Still, I was a little confused about what the story was that was being presented so far. So overall, I give We Have Always Lived in the Castle a 17 out of 20 on approach. Characters. I don't need characters. Well, I suppose I need my sister and my cat. But everyone else can just die. Isn't that why we read a book? To see who's going to die? Don't we just want to watch all of the characters die? I mean, I suppose if they're nice to me, maybe I'll save one of them. But if I'm writing the story, I think we know what's going to happen. I really feel like Shirley Jackson is very good at establishing a variety of characters with different perspectives, and when an author is really good at that, I feel like it just naturally creates conflict. Starting with the protagonist, in my opinion, her mind is very much like an exploration of neurodivergence, combined with a fascination of death. She can be fairly antisocial, a bit isolated. That doesn't speak for all neurodivergent people, of course. It is a spectrum. But for the most part, the way she approaches life is very off-putting to pretty much everybody that encounters her. They view her as different. They view her as weird, needing some kind of help or punishment for being different. That is a very common message that neurodivergent people experience in this world. And because of that, I was really in love with the choices that Shirley Jackson made, especially since this book was published in 1962 originally, which psychology is still very new. And the concepts of autism as we know today and neurodivergence was not fully established. And so it almost feels like Shirley Jackson was ahead of her time. She wasn't labeling these girls as having any kind of diagnosis or anything like that, but to me it was very clear that she was speaking from the perspective of someone who sees the world differently and who is viewed very oddly by the outside world, by most people who don't understand. The complaints that I do have about characters, in certain ways they're all a little unlikable. There's not a single character in this book that's really just a likable relief style character. Everybody to a degree in this book has a polarity of things that you could see being good about them for the most part, and things that really kind of create conflict or unease or discomfort. And the thing is that to me, this adds believability to these characters. It adds a humanistic aspect to these characters. And it really feels like Shirley Jackson is approaching these characters with intentionality. Still, there were multiple times where I was reading this book and going, oh my gosh, do this instead, or maybe just say this part out loud, or not that. And there were also moments that were just very repetitive. Again, I think this speaks to reality because most thoughts aren't one and done. Technically, people are the thoughts we think every day. That's usually what results in repeated behavior and in personality development. And she taps into that, right? It can be a little annoying, but overall, there's so much intentionality to it. The only reason why I'm cutting down some points is because there are a couple of moments that I just didn't like. And that I just felt like, even though it was realistic, it added to like an annoyance or frustration of the experience for me. So overall, I give We Have Always Lived in the Castle a 17 out of 20 in characters. Offerings. I like offerings. I like to offer things to the ground. I don't care if they're worth money, silver dollars themselves, or jewelry. I'll put them in the ground. It'll make me feel better about myself, yes. I think that's true. I also like to offer words to Wily Wallaby soft and chewy hot cinnamon candies. Yes, they're not as good as hot tamales, but who cares? They're still delicious and spicy. And that reminds me, don't say those 3 words you picked earlier. You can say them in your mind like you are right now, but don't say them out loud. Don't say cacophony. Don't say phalanges. Don't say poopsicle. It's very important you remember these things. I already kind of mentioned most of the things I'm going to be covering in this section, so I'll keep it brief. As I mentioned before, this book has a lot of vibes of early works of Tim Burton. I feel like there's a lot of familiar vibes when it comes to works like Secret Garden, even like Practical Magic to a degree, if you've seen that movie, because it really is telling the story of this ugly, drab town, which reminds me of like Halloween Town or the town in Corpse Bride, where everything is just gray and drab. There is still like this isolationist aspect of a them versus us. We need to protect ourselves as we kind of live in some kind of dark brooding in this big house. Very similar to Secret Garden, very similar to Practical Magic. I felt like this book does tap into a vibe of things that I actually usually gravitate towards. I liked the darkness that is in this book. And the main character also has this superstitious, magical kind of view of things. She likes to daydream about being on the moon. She likes to bury things in the yard or do these little magic tricks that she comes up with to give the house and the people in it some protection. And then, of course, there's the whole exploration of being in what I would consider a neurodivergent mind, seeing the world in a different way than most people and having that reflection from other people's perspective of you be pretty hostile or judgmental. Some complaints though, this is not really that new of an experience in my opinion. Like I said, there's a bunch of other works that kind of mirror some of the vibes and the offerings in this book. And at times this really is kind of just a story of everyday life in an eccentric situation. On this day, we tidy the house. On this day, I go to the market. On this day, this person visits. And so that repetition does carry through to the offerings. And at times, it can be a little bit boring. There's even some similar ideas to Shirley Jackson's short story, The Lottery, which happened before this book. And if you don't know that story, I would highly recommend you read it. It does give voice to the idea of like collective delusion, to the idea of mob mentality and how it can be common and even accepted in some situations for a group of people to see a boogeyman where it doesn't exist and to act upon that in a way that might not really seem logical from the outside. That vibe still carries into this book to a degree, but I would argue that this book isn't as potent. So overall, I give We Have Always Lived in the Castle a 15 out of 20 as far as offerings goes. Readability. Readability reminds me of those library books I checked out once and never returned. What were they? Oh, yes. The La Cage aux Folles libretto was one of them when you were cast in that musical so long ago. That was a good time. But you were too lazy to bring those books back to the library, and then you got nervous that you'd bring them back and they'd arrest you on the spot. They would probably just charge you a $5 million fine, but you know what? Now they'll never have the book back. And that's a shame, because the library is worth supporting. Go support your local library. Overall, I think this book is actually very readable. The length is very short. The language accessibility is very high. And I would say that the triggers are low to medium low. If you do know what it is like to feel like an outsider, to feel like if you leave your house that you're going to just be judged, to feel like if you express your own authentic opinion, that other people who don't really know you are likely to look at you funny or weird, that is very prevalent in this book. And there's a lot of pressure throughout this book for these girls to change. And that can be a sensitive subject for some people. I know that I've struggled a lot with that concept, and because of it, I tend to be an isolationist loner. I tend to exist mostly in this room or with my close loved ones, and I really don't have much desire to leave. I definitely can. I have the capability, just like Mary Cat does, but at the same time, I see myself as someone who's much more content with less and with sticking to like a regimen. I don't need a whole lot of stimulation in my experience for it to be exciting or interesting. And so I related a lot with this book. To me, it was very relatable, and those triggers did come in just a little bit. There is this one period in the book that does kind of feel like a state of mass delusion. That can feel a bit intense. But overall, I think this book is more digestible than not. So I give We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson an 18 out of 20 for readability. Narration. When it comes to narration, I'm tired of people narrating for others. I think people need to stop defining who other people are for them and start defining themselves. If we all just worked on ourselves a little bit more, let us all just stay in our houses forever and look in the mirror or not look in the mirror and just determine who we are and determine what we want and stop forcing our perspective on other people. That would be really lovely. I think that's what I do, and it's about time that others do it too. We Have Always Lived in the Castle is told in first-person perspective, past tense, from solely the perspective of Mary Catherine. And as I mentioned, it was a little bit of a hurdle at first, but then my mind got adjusted to it. Shirley Jackson is very consistent with her brushstrokes of this psychology of this character. I got used to this voice, and I was able to anticipate, moments of this character becoming frustrated or acting out a little bit. And so I thought she did a really good job in telling that part of the story. As far as the structure of the story goes, when I first started reading, I was confused as to what is the point. There's not really like a deadline or a big conflict that you're building up towards as far as the reader's awareness goes. But then around like the 20% mark, they really delivered the hook. And I just thought to myself, like, ooh, now I'm fully invested. I want to know more. But overall, it is really a story that is, we are set in our ways, and any little thing that might disrupt that is kind of an obstacle we will tackle when it happens. We try to avoid it, but when it happens, we tackle it and try to maintain our status quo. And so because of that, I don't know, I didn't think the structure was the best. The main climax of the book was much more intense than the rest of the book, and I didn't really feel like it was entirely justified. It was explained, I understood what was happening. The build up to it didn't really feel like it made a lot of sense. And the resolution mostly left me feeling unsatisfied, but there were some saving graces towards the very end that still give you some sense of satisfaction, even though when the conflict rises and the climax hits, there's so much discomfort that happens in this book, in my opinion. So while I still stand by this idea that this book is actually very accessible and readable, the narration itself, I struggle with a little bit for those reasons. I give We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson a 16 out of 20 in narration. All right, so in summary, I gave We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson a total of 83 acorns out of 100. It kind of leaves a bitter taste in my mouth, to be honest. I think 83 is a great score because I think overall this is a good story. I feel like this is exactly what Shirley Jackson was trying to put out there. And so for that, I think that it was very successful. even if it is a kind of an uncomfortable read at times. Something that I found to be interesting about my copy is that there is an afterword at the very end, a very short afterword by Jonathan Lethem. And what I like is he does give some background about how Shirley Jackson's own life kind of created the conditions for her to write this book. The short story, The Lottery, as I've mentioned a few times already, was such a polarizing story. It is one of the most commonly taught and yet one of the most banned stories that has ever existed because of how intense it is. And it's almost as though Mary Cat is Shirley Jackson herself. Apparently she got a very intense agoraphobia towards the end of her life, and she was almost seen as this like witch of a human because of the perspective she provided in The Lottery. Looking at it from that perspective, it adds a lot more depth to this book than the story itself provides. So I liked that. I liked that afterward that comes with this version. And one thing that I think is absolutely hilarious is there is a line here that is referring to Shirley Jackson's husband, and it refers to him as a garrulous egoist. I read that and I was like, it actually says garrulous. Like, I think that's hilarious. I love it. So that is my review. So the next book I will be reading is Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. I figure it's time for a chunkier book. I have 2 chunkier books still yet to read this month. Parable of the Sower and Consider Phlebas from Ian M. Banks. And I've pretty much only read like shorter books so far this month, and I need to make sure that I can get through these by the end of the month. So I'm going to start with Parable of the Sower, which I've been very excited about. And that's that. Man, ooh, I think this is going to be a really good review, and I'm really glad that this time there was not a cacophony of phalanges in my poopsicle. Oh no! BookSquirrel. I don't know.